The range road smelled like gun oil and wet clay, and I stood at the fence and let it tell me things. It was a little before 0600. The light was still gray. Fog sat low in the draws where the land navigation lanes ran, and the marksmanship line was a row of dark shapes bent over their weapons, and somewhere out past the berms, a generator ran steady. I had a soft bag over one shoulder, civilian clothes, a gray jacket, boots that had never carried rank on them, hair loose because I had driven through the night and had not yet decided to be anyone in particular. That was on purpose. I had come 3 days early. You learn things about a course by walking its ground before the ground knows you are coming. You learn where the water pools. You learn which lane the cadre trust and which one they only pretend to. You learn the tempo of a firing line, the rhythm a place keeps when it thinks no one important is watching. I had run enough of these to know that the truth of a course is never in the briefing slides. It is in the first hour of a cold morning when the coffee has not worked yet and nobody is performing. So I stood at the fence and read the line. 14 shooters, prone, 2 cadre walking behind them with the flat, patient boredom of men who have called 10,000 shots. The wind was coming off my left shoulder, light, maybe 5 miles an hour, the kind of wind that does not feel like anything until it moves around 2 inches at 300 meters and a candidate blames himself for a thing the air did. I watched a young soldier on the far end pull his shots low and right, again, and I knew before the cadre said it that he was mashing the trigger because his elbow was in the wrong place, and I felt the old itch to walk over and fix it. I did not walk over. It was not my line yet. In 3 days, it would be. I want to be honest about the morning, because the morning was ordinary for a long time, and the ordinary part matters. I liked it there. That is the truth. I liked the smell and the gray light and the sound of a bolt riding home. I had spent 24 years in places like that one, and most of the men who had underestimated me were dead or retired or had learned better, and I had made a kind of peace with the arithmetic of my own life. I was 42 years old. I had a drawer at home with a medal in it I did not look at, and a photograph next to the medal I looked at more than I should. I had come back to run a selection course because a man I lost a long time ago would have wanted it run right, and because the regiment had finally let me go, and because I was good at it. Those were my reasons. They were enough. I did not come back to be recognized. I want that on the record, too. A cadre sergeant drifted over to the fence around 0615. Young, squared away. He had the careful courtesy soldiers use on people they assume are lost. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "You looking for the visitor center? It is back down the hardball, other side of the gate." "I'm good," I said. "Just watching." He hesitated. He wanted to move me along because a stranger at the fence of a live range is a problem he did not want. And I understood that, and I did not hold it against him. I had been that sergeant. "We have a relay running for a while yet," he said. "Might be more comfortable waiting up front." "I will stay out of the way," I said. "I have watched a line before." He gave me a nod that did not believe me and went back to his shooters. I did not use his mistake against him. I could have. I could have said 7 words and turned that whole fence into a different morning. I did not, because there is a discipline to being underestimated, and I had spent a career learning it, and I was not going to spend it on a courteous kid doing his job. Here is the thing they could not see from the line. My hands were still. That is the tell, if you know to look for it. Not the clothes, not the hair, not the bag they all assumed held a camera, the hands. A person who belongs on a range does not fidget near one. I stood with my weight even and my hands quiet and my eyes moving the way a reconnaissance soldier's eyes move, in slow, overlapping arcs, cataloging, and if any one of them had known what they were looking at, they would have felt it. They did not. They saw a woman at a fence. In the outer pocket of my bag, folded flat where it would not crease, was a tan beret. I had carried it a long way to earn the right to fold it into a pocket like that, and not need anyone to know. Out on the line, the low and right kid pulled another group into the dirt. One of the cadre crouched next to him and started talking about his natural point of aim, which was the right lecture for the wrong problem, and I felt the itch again and let it pass. The line always tells the truth, eventually. You cannot fake a firing line. You can fake a uniform, a story, a swagger, a whole reputation, but you cannot fake what happens when a round leaves a barrel, and that is why I have loved firing lines my entire life. They do not care who your father was. They do not care what you are wearing. They only ask one question over and over, and they will not be lied to. I planned to stand there quietly until the relay ended, and then find the cadre office, and then be no one for 3 more days. That was the plan. Plans are a way of amusing the morning. There is a way to read a line that has nothing to do with the shooting. I had been reading lines for 24 years. You watch the cadre first, not the candidates, because the cadre tell you what the course values by where they choose to stand. A course that cares about fundamentals puts its best instructor behind the worst shooter. A course that cares about its statistics puts him behind the best one. I watched where the good instructor stood that morning, and it told me the truth about the place before a single briefing slide got the chance to lie to me. Then you watch the candidates, and you do not watch their targets. You watch their shoulders. A tired shoulder rides up toward the ear. A frightened shoulder locks. A shoulder that has finally figured out the weapon drops and softens and disappears into the position. And you can see a man learn in real time if you know to watch the meat and not the paper. None of that reads on the outside of a person. That is the whole point I am trying to make. You cannot see 24 years by looking at a gray jacket and loose hair and a soft bag. You cannot see the tan beret folded flat in the outer pocket. You cannot see the drawer at home or the photograph in it. You cannot see the ridge. All of it is interior, all of it is earned, and none of it announces itself. And a person who needs it to announce itself has not actually earned it yet. That is the discipline of being underestimated, and it is a real discipline, as real as marksmanship, and it takes as long to learn. The undisciplined version of you wants to correct the record the second it is written wrong. The disciplined version lets the record stand, because she knows something the room does not, which is that the record is not finished being written, and the last line has not been added, and the last line is always written on the range and never at the fence. I had learned that discipline the hard way, which is the only way it is ever learned. There had been years, early on, when I answered every doubt out loud, when I let every raised eyebrow pull a sentence out of me, when I thought the job was to convince the room. It is not the job. The room is not the job. The work is the job, and the room is just weather that happens near the work, and you do not argue with weather. You dress for it and you keep going. I need to take you back 14 years, because the fence that morning was not the first time a place decided who I was before I opened my mouth. It is never the first time. That is the part nobody tells you. The wound is always old. In the fall of 2012, I was a staff sergeant, 28 years old, on a long-range reconnaissance patrol in the mountains. I will not name the country. It does not matter. What matters is the ridge. We had a hide up high, 4 of us, watching a valley trail for 3 days. My team leader was Staff Sergeant Deacon Poole. He was 29, a year older than me, and a career ahead of me in the ways that counted. And he had a habit of chewing sunflower seeds in total silence for hours, and then saying the one thing that mattered. He had picked me for the team when other men would not have. I have never forgotten the size of that. On the 3rd morning, the hide was compromised. It does not matter how. A goat herd, a glint, a piece of luck that ran out. By 0540, we were taking fire from above and below, which is the worst geometry there is, and Poole made the call to break contact down the ridge because down was the only direction that was not already killing us. We had a young soldier named Toby Renner, specialist, 20 years old. He took a round through the thigh in the first 30 seconds and went down in the scree, and the femur was gone, and he could not walk, and the math of that moment was very simple and very cruel. Someone had to carry him. Someone had to cover. "You take Renner," Poole said. He was already turning back toward the high ground. "I have got the rear." I want to tell you there was a conversation. There was not. There was his voice, flat and certain, and there was Renner's weight coming onto my shoulders. And there was the ridge dropping away under my boots for the next 40 minutes while I carried 170 pounds of wounded man down a mountain that was trying to kill both of us. I have carried heavier things than a wounded man. His name, for one. Poole's name. Deacon Poole did not come down the ridge. He held the rear so that Renner and I and the 4th man could reach the low saddle where the aircraft could get to us. And he did his job perfectly. The way he did everything, in silence. And the last thing I heard from him was on the radio, 3 words. Calm as a man reading a map. Then nothing. We got Renner out. He lived. He is 34 now, and he has 2 kids and a job at a hardware store in a town I have driven a long way to visit. And he is alive because a ridge took the right man instead of the wrong one, and I have never once been able to feel that as a victory. They gave me a silver star for that morning. There was a ceremony. A general read a citation with words like gallantry and disregard for personal safety, and people clapped, and I stood at attention and thought about sunflower seeds. I put the star in a drawer when I got home, Next to it, I put a photograph of 4 people on a ridge, 3 of whom came home. I look at the photograph. I do not look at the star. The star is a small, cold thing. The photograph is the reason for everything I have done since. I tell you all of this so you understand what was standing at that fence in the gray light. Not a visitor, not a lost civilian, a woman who had already paid, in the only currency that is real, for the right to read a firing line in silence and let a young man mistake her for nothing. Noise does not move me. It hasn't moved me since a quiet man on a ridge taught me what quiet costs. Let me tell you the rest of the ridge, because I have found that the short version protects me more than it honors him. And Poole deserves to be honored more than I deserve to be protected. We were in that hide for 3 days before it went wrong. 3 days is a long time in a 2-man rotation of watch. Cold and cramped and boring in the specific way that only dangerous places are boring, where nothing happens for so long that your body forgets to be afraid, and then everything happens at once. Poole ran the hide the way he ran everything, quietly, precisely, with the economy of movement that I have spent my whole career trying to copy and never quite matched. He chewed sunflower seeds. He spat the shells into a plastic bag so we would leave no trace. He said maybe 40 words a day, and every one of them was load-bearing. On the morning of the 3rd day, the compromise came the way they always come, small and stupid and unrecoverable. A herder came up the draw with his animals earlier than the pattern said he should, and one of the goats found our position because goats find everything, and the herder followed the goat, and then the herder was looking at 4 soldiers who were not supposed to exist, and after that, it was only ever going to go one way. The first fire came from above us, which should not have been possible, which meant they had been moving on us longer than we knew. Then it came from below. Above and below at the same time is the worst geometry there is. There is no good direction to move when both the high ground and the low ground are trying to kill you. And Poole took about 1 second to do the math that the rest of us were still too stunned to start, and he chose down because down at least ended at an aircraft. Renner took the round almost immediately, high in the thigh, and I saw the way he dropped, and I knew it was the femur before I reached him. Because a man whose femur is gone falls in a way a man with a flesh wound does not. There was no question of him walking. There was barely a question of him living. And the geometry meant somebody had to carry him, and somebody had to buy the time for the carrying, and those 2 jobs could not be the same person, and there were not enough of us to be generous about it. You take Renner. I have got the rear. 4 words. No conversation. He was already moving to the high side before the sentence finished, already putting his body between the thing coming down the mountain and the 2 of us going down it, and I got Renner across my shoulders, and I started down, and the last clear thing I have of Deacon Poole is the back of him, calm, unhurried, doing his job. The descent took somewhere around 40 minutes. I do not remember most of it. The body does things in those minutes that the mind is not invited to. I remember the weight, and the scree sliding, and Renner's breathing in my ear getting shallower, and then, when I talked to him, getting deeper again, because I made him answer me the whole way down so he could not leave. I remember the radio. I remember 3 words from Poole near the end, calm as a man reading a map to a stranger, and then I remember the aircraft and the saddle and hands taking Renner off my shoulders and turning to look back up the mountain at a ridge that did not give him back. The relay ended a little after 0630. The shooters cleared their weapons and rolled onto their backs and did the small human things men do when a stressor lifts. They laughed, they talked, and one of them found me. His name I would learn was Brett Maddox. He was 24. His Ranger tab was new enough to still look like it surprised him, and he wore it the way young men wear a thing they have not yet earned the humility to carry. He was not a bad soldier. I want to be fair to him, even now. He was a young one who had just done a hard thing and needed the whole world to know it. And the whole world that morning was 30 tired candidates and 1 woman at a fence. He walked toward me with an audience already turning to watch. That is a choice a certain kind of man makes. He did not lower his voice. "Let me guess," Maddox said, playing to the group. "Reporter? Girlfriend?" He looked me up and down, slow, for the laugh. "You'd never survive selection, ma'am. This is not a petting zoo." 30 candidates laughed. I let them. I want you to understand that I let them on purpose, because that is the part that is hard to explain to people who have not lived it. There is a version of me that answers a boy like that in half a second and leaves him in pieces. That version is real. I have used her. But she gives nothing back. She is a reflex, not a decision, and I stopped making that morning about reflexes a long time ago, on a ridge, when the loudest thing in the world was a man being quiet. So I stood there, hands still, and I looked at Maddox the way you look at weather. "You want to try the course?" he said, warming to it because I had not given him the fight that would have ended it clean. "I will spot you. First obstacle. We can live stream it." Somebody whooped. I checked my watch. It was 0634. I remember, because I remember all of it. "I will stay out of your way," I said. That was all. 6 words. It should have ended there, with him getting his laugh and me getting my silence, and both of us walking into the rest of our lives. It did not end there, because at that moment, up the line, the senior instructor started walking toward the fence, and he was carrying a clipboard. His name was Owen Trask, Sergeant First Class. 38 years old, the kind of cadre a course is actually built on. The man who runs the thing while officers sign the paperwork. He had a stack on that clipboard, and on the top of the stack was the in-brief for the incoming senior cadre, the personnel packet with a name and a face he had been told to expect in 3 days and had not yet connected to anything. He was coming to move the civilian along. That was all. Same as his sergeant an hour before. He got within about 15 feet of me and glanced up from the clipboard, and his eyes went across my face the way eyes do, casually, and then they went back down to the clipboard, and then they came back up to my face and stopped. I watched him do the arithmetic. I have watched a lot of people do it over the years, and it always looks the same. The eyes narrow, the head tilts a half degree, the person reads the name on the page, then the photograph on the page, then the woman in front of them, then the photograph again. And somewhere in that loop, the floor of their morning drops away. Trask read the name twice. I saw his lips move on it. Once. Silent. Then he came to attention. He did it without theater. He did not shout. He just squared his boots and dropped his hands to his sides and locked his spine and held. And his face did the thing a soldier's face does when it is refusing to show how fast the world has just moved. And he looked at me and not at me at the same time, the way you look at something you have decided to render respect to. Maddox did not understand. He was still grinning. He looked at Trask, then at me, then at Trask, and the grin was starting to curdle at the edges without his permission. "What are you doing, Sergeant?" Maddox said. Trask did not answer him. He was not talking to Maddox. He was holding attention for a woman he had been told to expect, and had almost walked past. And the clipboard was down at his side now, forgotten, and his jaw was tight. And down the line, one candidate lowered the rifle he had been cleaning and sat up. Then another. Then the whole line saw it too. There is a silence that is louder than any noise a range can make, and it rolled down that firing line in about 4 seconds. Trask held his attention. His eyes came off the middle distance and settled on me, and there was a question in them. And I knew the question because I had asked it myself of my own leaders 100 times. The question was, say the word, and I will burn this down for you. Trask was a professional. He had watched a candidate run his mouth at the incoming senior cadre in front of the entire course, and every instinct 20 years of soldiering had built in him was pointing at Maddox like a loaded weapon, waiting for permission. "Master Sergeant," Trask said. Quiet. Careful. It was the first time anyone had said my rank out loud that morning, and it landed on the line like a dropped plate. Say the word. The word was the easiest thing I owned. That was the problem. I felt the pull of it. I want to be honest about that because I think the pull is where most people lose the thread of who they want to be. It would have been so easy. 1 sentence, and Maddox would have spent the rest of the course as the cautionary tale, the boy who mocked a silver star at a fence, the punchline in a story cadre would tell for 10 years. I had earned that sentence, every bit of it. He had handed it to me, gift-wrapped, in front of witnesses. And it would have given me nothing. That is the thing nobody warns you about. I have ended men's mornings before. I have used the word. It is a small, cold satisfaction, like the metal in the drawer, and it does not fill the space it promises to fill, and by lunch you are still exactly who you were before you spent it. Maddox understood now. Not all at once, in stages. I watched it happen to him the way I had watched it happen to Trask, except from the other side, and it was not a pleasant thing to watch, and I did not enjoy it the way a younger version of me would have. First his eyes went to the clipboard at Trask's side, and something in him started reaching for a possibility he did not want to hold. Then he looked at me again, and this time he actually looked, the way he should have looked the first time, and I watched him see the stillness in my hands, and the way I stood, and the flat, unbothered patience that a person only earns one way. Then the color left him. It went out of his face from the top down, the way it does, and his new tab suddenly looked very heavy on his arm, and his mouth opened and produced nothing. "Ma'am," he started. Then he stopped, because ma'am was the word he had used to insult me, and he did not have another one ready. "You called it a petting zoo," I said. Not unkindly, just level. "Two of your last 3 groups went low and right specialist. You want to tell me why? Or you want to keep talking about the zoo?" That was the moment I could have chosen cruelty, and everyone would have called it justice. The line was braced for it. Trask was braced for it. Maddox was braced for it most of all, standing there with his whole young career reorganizing itself in real time, waiting for the woman he had mocked to do to him what the world does to men who mock the wrong person. I did not want to do that to him. Not because he did not deserve a hard morning, because a hard morning was not the same as a lesson, and I had come back to teach, and you cannot teach a man while you are busy being right at him. Trask was still at attention. I had not released him. "Sergeant Trask," I said, "at ease. Carry on the relay. I will be on the line in a minute." He came off attention slowly, like a man setting down a heavy thing he was not sure he was allowed to put down yet. And he looked at me one more time, and there was something in his face that I had not earned that morning and had not asked for. Respect that predated me. He had known the name on the clipboard before he ever saw my face. He just had not known it was standing at his fence in a gray jacket. "Yes, Master Sergeant," he said. The line breathed. 30 candidates who had laughed 9 minutes ago were now trying very hard to be invisible, and Maddox stood in the center of it, alone in the specific way you can only be alone in a crowd that just watched you fall. I could have ended his morning. I had ended mornings before. It never gave anything back. I need to tell you about the time I did use the word, so you understand why I did not use it on Maddox. It was years ago, when I was newer to being the person a room reorganizes around, and I had not yet learned what the reorganizing costs. A young soldier said something to me, something dismissive, in front of others, not so different from what Maddox said at the fence, and I had the word, and I was still angry enough in those days to spend it, and I spent it. I took him apart in front of the people whose opinion he cared about most, cleanly, surgically, with the full authority of everything I had earned, and it was, in the narrow, technical sense, deserved. I remember the silence after. I remember his face. And I remember that I felt good for about 4 seconds, and then I felt nothing, and then, by that evening, I felt slightly worse than I had before he ever opened his mouth, because I had traded a piece of who I wanted to be for a piece of being right, and the exchange rate on that trade is terrible, and nobody tells you until you have already made it. That soldier never got better. That is the part that stayed with me. I had used the word, and it had ended the moment, and it had not taught him one single thing except that the woman with the rank could hurt him if he crossed her. He got quieter around me and no better at his job, which is the exact opposite of what a leader is for. I had won the moment and lost the soldier, and I have thought about him more than I have thought about almost any of the ones I won. So when Trask said say the word, and the whole line braced for it, and Maddox stood there waiting to be taken apart, I was not being noble. I want to be clear about that. I was not being kind. I was being experienced. I had spent the word before, and I knew exactly what it bought, and it was not worth what it cost. And I had a young soldier in front of me who could still be reached if I did not wreck him first. People think a reckoning is a loud thing. It is usually a decision made in a quiet voice. I made mine standing on that range road with the fog burning off the draws and 30 young men waiting to find out what kind of cadre had just walked into their lives. I could feel the shape of the next hour the way you feel weather coming. It could be about me. It wanted to be about me. The line had handed me the whole morning, and it would have let me spend it any way I chose. I decided it was not going to be about me. It was going to be about the line. Rank can silence a room. I have watched it happen. A senior person walks in, and the temperature drops, and everyone gets very still and very correct, and nothing is learned, and nothing changes. And the moment the senior person leaves the room, exhales and goes back to exactly what it was. Rank is a hammer. It is loud, and it is fast, and it only knows how to do one thing. I did not come back to a selection course to be a hammer. Any sergeant with a loud voice can be a hammer. I wanted to teach. Teaching is slower. Teaching does not photograph well. But teaching is the only thing that outlives the teacher, and I have buried enough people to have opinions about what outlives us. So I made 3 decisions in about the time it takes to breathe twice. The first decision was that Maddox would stay. I would not remove him from the course, would not recommend it, would not let this morning become the reason a young soldier washed out. He had earned a hard correction. He had not earned the end of a career, and the difference between those 2 things is the whole job. The second decision was that I would not announce myself. Nobody was going to read a citation on that range road. Nobody was going to call the line to attention and introduce the legend. If who I was mattered, it would have to introduce itself the way it had always introduced itself. on the line, in the only language a firing line respects. The third decision was the hardest, and it was about me. And it was this. I would let the grief stay where it belonged, in the drawer at home next to the photograph, and I would not let it turn me into a person who needed a 24-year-old boy to pay for a ridge in a country I will not name. Renner did not pay for that ridge. Poole paid for that ridge. Maddox owed nothing on it. It was not his debt, and I was not going to hand it to him just because he had been careless with his mouth on the wrong morning. I looked at Trask, running the relay again now, glancing back at me every few seconds like a man making sure a thing was still real. I looked at Maddox, standing in his wreckage. "Specialist," I said, "grab your weapon. You are going to shoot, and I am going to watch. And then we are going to have a conversation about your elbow." He blinked. Whatever he had braced for, it was not that. "My elbow, Master Sergeant?" "Your elbow," I said. "Get on the line." I made my decision the way I have made all of them, quietly and all the way through. I have thought a great deal, over the years, about the difference between authority and leadership, because the two get confused constantly and the confusion does enormous damage. Authority is what the rank gives you. It is real and it is useful and it is entirely external. When I put my rank on, a room does what I say, and that is a tool. And like any tool, it is good for some jobs and useless for others. Authority is very good at making people comply. It is completely incapable of making them believe. You can order a soldier to be on the line at 0500. You cannot order him to care about his elbow. The caring has to be taught, and teaching is not an act of authority at all. Teaching is an act of leadership, and leadership is the thing the rank cannot give you. The thing you have to build with your own hands out of 1,000 small choices, most of which nobody sees. The choice at the fence was one of those. Nobody would have seen the version where I let Trask burn Maddox down. Or rather, everybody would have seen it, and none of them would have learned anything from it except to be afraid of me, and fear is just compliance wearing a scarier coat. It looks like leadership from a distance. It is not. The soldiers who follow you out of fear will follow you exactly as far as the fear reaches and not one step past it, and the day the fear runs out, so do they. Poole never used fear, not once. I never saw him raise his voice. He led a team of hard men through the worst terrain on earth on 40 words a day, and a certainty you could set your watch by, and every one of us would have followed him off the edge of the world, not because we were afraid of him, but because we had watched him make the right choice, quietly, when nobody was making him over and over until the trust was just a fact, like the weather. That is what I was reaching for when I told Maddox to get on the line. Not the fear, the other thing, the thing that takes years and cannot be ordered and is the only thing worth having. Maddox got on the line. He was rattled, and a rattled man shoots worse, and I let him do it anyway, because I needed him to fail one more time in a way he could learn from, instead of the way he had been failing all morning, in a way he could only blame himself for. He settled into the prone. I knelt behind him, off his right shoulder, the way I have knelt behind 1,000 shooters, and I read his position before he fired a single round. His feet were fine. His grip was fine. The problem was where it usually is, up high, where nobody looks because everybody is looking at the trigger. His firing elbow was too far out, almost 90 degrees from his body, which collapsed the pocket where the stock should have sat and let the recoil steer him instead of the other way around. And because the stock was not locked into meat and bone, every time he broke a shot, the rifle walked, low and right, exactly the group he had been throwing all morning and exactly the group the other cadre had misdiagnosed as a breathing problem. "Before you fire," I said, "tell me where these are going to go." "Center, Master Sergeant," he said, "because that is what you say." "No," I said. "They are going low and right, same as your last 3 groups, and you are going to blame your trigger, and it is not your trigger. Fire when ready. 3 rounds. He fired 3 rounds. They went low and right. He did not say anything. He turned his head a few degrees and looked back at me, and it was a different look than the one he had given me at the fence. There was no audience in it anymore. There was just a young soldier who had missed the same way for 6 hours and had a stranger call it before it happened. "How did you?" he started and did not finish. "Because I have missed that exact way," I said. "On a worse day, with worse stakes. Pull your elbow in, down and in, tuck it against your ribs, build a shelf for the stock so it has somewhere to live. Do not touch your trigger. Do not think about your trigger. Your trigger was never the problem. Rebuild the shelf and fire 3 more. He tucked his elbow in. I watched the pocket form, watched the stock finally seat where it belonged, watched his whole position stop fighting itself. "Fire when ready," I said. He fired 3 rounds. They went center, all 3. A group you could cover with a coin. He stared at it downrange like it was somebody else's target. "That is your rifle telling the truth," I said. "It was always telling the truth. You just had it wired wrong. Now you know the difference, and you will feel it every time it drifts, for the rest of your life. That is worth more than a good morning. That is a fix you own." I stood up. My knees told me I was 42. I ignored them. And then, because the line had earned it, and because some things do have to be shown and not just said, "I did the other thing," I want to be honest that there was a small human part of me that wanted to, and I do not think that part is a sin as long as you do not let it drive. "Sergeant Trask," I said, "loaner weapon, whatever you have got zeroed." Trask had a rifle in my hands before I finished the sentence. Somebody down the line made a sound, low, the kind of sound a line makes when it realizes it is about to see something. I got down into the prone in a gray civilian jacket with my hair coming loose, 42 years old, on a cold line at a course I did not yet officially run, and I built the shelf the way I had just described it, elbow down and in, stock seated in meat and bone, and I let my breathing go long and slow the way a quiet man taught me on a ridge, and I put rounds into the 300-meter target in a group that answered every laugh from that morning without saying one word about the laughing. I did not do it fast, for show. I did it clean, for the record. When I finished, I cleared the weapon, locked the bolt to the rear, and handed it back to Trask. And I did not look downrange to admire it, because a person who belongs on a line does not need to look. The line tells you, you feel a good group leave the barrel the way you feel a lie leave your own mouth. That was when Captain Nolan Reyes reached the road. He was the course commander, 34, and he had come down from the operations hut when somebody radioed him that something was happening on the range, and he arrived expecting a problem to solve and found instead his newest senior cadre kneeling on the line in civilian clothes, teaching a rattled specialist about his elbow with the whole course sitting up and paying attention in a way no officer can order. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at the target downrange. He looked at me. And he did the small, correct thing an officer does when the institution catches up to what the line already knows. He came to a respectful stand, not quite attention, and he waited to be acknowledged instead of announcing himself, which told me everything I needed to know about whether Reyes was going to be easy to work for. "Master Sergeant Corley," he said, "we were not expecting you until Thursday." "I like to walk the ground first, sir," I said. "It tells you the truth before the briefing gets a chance to." I never told them who I was. Not once, all morning. I did not have to. I showed them what I could do, and I let the 2 facts introduce themselves to each other, and that is the only introduction a firing line has ever respected. I have replayed that group in my head a few times since, not out of pride, but because of what it did to the line. And what it did to the line is the only part that interests me. A firing line knows the difference between a person who is performing competence and a person who simply has it. They cannot always tell you how they know, but they always know, the way you can tell a real laugh from a polite one without being able to explain the mechanism. When I got down in that gray jacket and built the position and sent the rounds where I had just told Maddox to send his, the line did not react the way a crowd reacts to a trick. They reacted the way soldiers react to a fact. Quietly, with the particular stillness of people watching something be true. Nobody cheered. Cheering would have meant they thought it was a show. The silence meant they knew it was not. That is what I wanted them to have. Not a legend. A fact. The fact that the woman they had laughed at could do the thing the course exists to teach. Cleanly. On a cold line. At 42. Without warming up and without an audience she had asked for. Once that fact was on the ground, it did not need me to defend it. It just sat there. The way a good group sits on a target, unarguable, and everything else about the morning had to rearrange itself around it. The word travels faster than any radio on a base, and it had already started to travel. A vehicle came down the hardball a few minutes later, and Command Sergeant Major Vince Okafor got out of it. He was 47, the senior enlisted advisor for the whole training group, and he and I went back to a rotation neither of us talks about at parties. He had heard, from someone who had heard from someone, that the incoming cadre had turned up 3 days early and was on the range in civilian clothes, and he had come to see it for himself. Because that is exactly the kind of thing I would do, and he knew it. He walked across the range road with a grin that he was trying and failing to keep off his face, and he stuck out his hand. "Glad the regiment finally loaned you back to us, Corley," he said, loud enough, on purpose, so the line would hear the name attached to the hand he was shaking. "Took them long enough." "They held on tight, Sergeant Major, and I said, and shook it. That was the moment the size of the morning finally landed on the candidates all at once, in the specific silence of 30 people, recalculating everything they thought they knew. They had watched a course commander wait to be acknowledged. Now they watched the senior enlisted advisor of the entire group cross a range to shake the hand of the woman one of them had offered to live stream, falling off an obstacle. You could see them doing the math. You could see them arriving at the answer. Maddox was still on the line, and he had heard all of it, and I watched him absorb the full architecture of what he had done. It is a heavy thing to watch land on a young man. The mockery, the audience, the tab still crisp on his arm, and the woman at the fence turning out to be the person the entire chain of command had been waiting for. There is no hole deep enough to climb into when that arrives. You just have to stand in it. I have been on both sides of that silence. I have been the young loud one who got it wrong, a long time ago, before a quiet man taught me better. And I have been the person the room suddenly reorganizes itself around. Neither one is comfortable. The first one is worse. I remembered it well enough to feel something for Maddox that was not satisfaction. Okafor lowered his voice, so only I could hear it. "You want me to have a word with the specialist?" he said. "Save you the trouble." "No," I said. "He is mine. I have already started the word. It is a longer word than the one you are thinking of." Okafor looked at me for a second, and then he nodded, because he had known me a long time, and he understood the difference between the two words too. He had watched me use the short one years ago, and he had watched me stop. "Same Corley," he said. "Slower Corley," I said. "The rest is the same." He got back in his vehicle and left me my range. That is a courtesy senior people do not always extend, and I marked it, and I was grateful for it. The candidates were very quiet now. The loudest man on the line at dawn was the quietest man on the line by mid-morning, and he had not been made quiet by a punishment. He had been made quiet by understanding. That is the only kind of quiet that holds. Punishment wears off. Understanding does not. Trask ran the next relay. The shooting got better, all of it immediately, the way shooting does, when a line suddenly believes the person watching them can actually see. I walked behind them with my hands still and my eyes moving, and I fixed elbows, and I called wind, and for the first time all morning, I was exactly what I was. And nobody at that fence would ever mistake me for a visitor again. I watched the reactions move down the line, because reactions are data too, and a good cadre reads them the way a good cadre reads groups on paper. There was one candidate on the far end, older than the rest, maybe 30, prior service by the way he held himself, and he had figured it out before anyone else. He had not laughed at the fence. I had noticed that at the time and filed it. He was the one who lowered his rifle first when Trask came to attention, and now, watching the senior enlisted advisor shake my hand, he had the small, private smile of a man who had called it early and kept his mouth shut, which is a rarer and more valuable thing than being right loudly. I marked him. Every course has one or two who see clearly and stay quiet, and they are almost always worth developing. There were others who had laughed and now could not look at me, and that was fine. That was the morning doing its work. Shame is not a punishment. Shame is just information arriving late. What matters is not that they felt it, but what they did with it, and what most of them did with it was shoot better, immediately, and treat the next stranger at the next fence a little more carefully for the rest of their careers, which is the entire return on the morning and worth more than any speech I could have given. And there was Maddox at the center of it, learning the heaviest lesson a young soldier can learn, which is that the size of your certainty has nothing to do with the accuracy of it. He would carry that. Some of them carry it well and some of them carry it badly, and the difference is almost entirely whether the person who taught it to them chose to teach or chose to win. I had chosen to teach. Whether it took was up to him now. That is the humbling part of the job that the posters leave out. You do your part completely and correctly, and then you hand it to a 24-year-old, and you do not get to control what he does with it. You just get to be sure you gave him the version he could actually use. Okafor had known all of that when he offered to have a word. He was not really offering to discipline the specialist. He was offering me the easy exit, the loud one, the one that would have felt like justice, and he was not surprised when I turned it down, because he had watched me learn the difference the hard way, over a lot of years, on a lot of ranges, and he knew that the slower Corley was the better one, even if she was harder to make a good story out of. Late in the morning, there is a lull on a range when one relay has cleared and the next is still drawing ammunition, and I used it the way I always use it. I walked back to the ammo point by myself and stood in the quiet and let the morning catch up with me. This is the part nobody sees, the part after the recognition, when the line has gone back to work and the senior enlisted advisor has driven off with his grin, and you are alone with the thing that recognition can never touch. Because here's what I have learned about being recognized. It is pleasant and it is hollow at the same time, and if you're not careful, the pleasant part will convince you the hollow part is not there. The line stood up. Trask came to attention. A course full of young men learned my name in the worst possible way for one of them and the best possible way for the rest. And none of it, not 1 second of it, brought Deacon Poole down off that ridge. That is the arithmetic I live inside. I did not come back to that course to be honored. I have been honored. There is a silver star in a drawer in my house to prove it, and I have looked at that drawer maybe 4 times in 14 years, because the star is a small, cold thing to hold, and I have held it long enough to know its exact weight, and it is lighter than the thing it is supposed to stand in for. Next to the star is a photograph. 4 people on a ridge, taken by the 4th man the day before it all went wrong, before we knew anything, back when it was just cold and boring and endless the way most of it is. Poole is on the left. He is not smiling, because he almost never smiled, but there is something in the set of his face that I have spent 14 years trying to describe to myself and have never gotten right. Certainty, maybe. The look of a man who knew exactly what he was for. He was 29. I am now 13 years older than he ever got to be, which is a strange sentence to write and a stranger one to live. I have had a whole career he did not get. I made sergeant first class and then master sergeant. I earned the tab. I ran with the regiment. I stood on a cold range this morning and taught a boy about his elbow and watched a line come to attention. And every rung of that ladder was built on a morning when a quiet man said 4 words and turned back toward the high ground so that a wounded specialist and I could live. You take Renner. I have got the rear. That is what leadership actually is when you strip the posters off it. It is not the recognition. It is not the line standing up. It is a man deciding in half a second, without a conversation, that the math will be paid out of his own account and not yours. Poole did that. He did it in silence, the way he did everything, and then he was gone. And I have spent every morning since trying to be worth the trade. That is why the mockery at the fence did not move me. How could it? I have stood in the space where Poole used to be. A 24-year-old calling me a lost civilian is not even weather next to that. It is not even a breeze. There is nothing a stranger can say about who I am that lands anywhere near the things I already know about who I am, and who I failed to bring home, and what it cost the right man to make me into the woman that stranger underestimated. Being right is a small, cold thing to hold. I have held it a long time. It does not keep you warm. It does not fill the seat at the table that stays empty. It just sits in your hand, correct and useless, while you go on living the life somebody else paid for. I stood at the ammo point and let all of that move through me, the way I have learned to let it move through instead of trying to stop it, because the ones who try to stop it are the ones it breaks. Then I wiped my hands on my jacket and I went back to the line, because that is the other thing Poole taught me, without ever saying it. You feel the whole weight of it, and then you go back to the line, because the line is where the living are, and the living are the only ones you can still do anything for. I did not come back for the line to stand up. I came back because a quiet man on a ridge would have wanted this course run right, and I am the one still here to run it. People ask me sometimes whether it gets easier. The ones who ask are usually younger, and usually they have just lost someone, and they are looking at me the way you look at a person who has carried the thing longer than you and seems to still be standing, hoping I have found the trick. There is no trick. That is the honest answer, and I try to give it gently. It does not get easier. It gets more familiar, which people mistake for easier, but they are not the same. The weight does not shrink. You just get stronger under it the way you get stronger under any weight you refuse to put down, and one day you notice you can carry it and have a conversation at the same time, and you mistake that for healing, but it is not healing, it is capacity. You have simply become a person large enough to hold it and keep walking, and that is the most anyone can promise you. And it is enough, because it has to be. What I have learned is that the grief and the gratitude live in the same room, and they never move out, and they never stop arguing. I am grateful every single day that Renner is alive. I grieve every single day that Poole is not. Those two facts came from the same 40 minutes on the same ridge. They are the same event seen from two sides, and there is no version of my life where I get to keep one and set down the other. They come as a pair. I have stopped trying to separate them. I let them share the room. Some mornings the gratitude is louder, and some mornings the grief is. And on the range that day, with a line coming to attention for a name I never said out loud, the grief was very loud indeed. Because recognition always makes it louder, because every honor I have ever received has arrived addressed to me and earned by him. That is the cost, not the danger. The danger is easy, in a strange way. The cost is the after. The cost is being the one who came home, and knowing exactly what that cost the man who did not, and carrying his name up every rung of a ladder he built and did not get to climb. The course ran until the light started going long in the afternoon, and then the candidates cleaned weapons and turned in ammunition and did the 1,000 small closing tasks a training day requires. And I found Maddox at the cleaning tables. He saw me coming and stood up straight and got that braced look again, the one that expects the other shoe. I sat down across from him instead and picked up a cleaning rod and started running it through the barrel of the weapon in front of me, because a hard conversation is easier for a young man across a table when the older person's hands are busy and their eyes are somewhere else. "You are not in trouble," I said. "I want you to hear that first, because I can see you waiting for it. You're not in trouble. You're going to finish this course, and if you do the work, you're going to finish it well." He did not say anything for a second. Then quietly, "I am sorry, Master Sergeant. For what I said, at the fence, I did not know." "That is the point," I said. "You did not know. You looked at a person and you decided you already had them figured out, and you were wrong, and you were loud about being wrong in front of an audience. That is the actual mistake. Not that you insulted me. I have been insulted by professionals. The mistake is that you looked at someone and thought the looking was the same as the knowing." He turned that over. He was a smart kid under the noise. Most of them are. The noise is usually fear wearing a costume. "How do I fix it?" he said. "You do not fix it with me," I said. "I am already fixed. You fix it with the next person you are tempted to be sure about. You are going to spend a career walking up to people you have decided are nothing, and every single time you are going to be wrong about at least some of them, and the good ones will make you pay for the assumption, and the bad ones will let you get away with it, and getting away with it is worse. Keep the apology. I do not need it. Spend the lesson. That is the only thing I want from this morning." "Keep the apology, spend the lesson," he repeated, like he was writing it somewhere he would not lose it. "And fix your elbow," I said. "Down and in, build the shelf. Every time it drifts low and right, you will know why now, and knowing why is the whole job." He almost smiled. "Yes, Master Sergeant." I left him there and went to find Trask, because I owed him something too. He had held attention for me in front of the whole course. That is a small thing and an enormous thing at the same time, and I have never let a person do a thing like that for me without saying so. He was squaring away the cadre paperwork in the operations hut. He came to attention when I walked in, and I waved him down. "You knew the name before you saw the face," I said. "I have known the name a long time, Master Sergeant," Trask said. "Everybody in the community knows the name. I just did not connect it to a lady at the fence in a gray jacket." He hesitated. "For what it is worth, I almost walked you off the range. I almost did the exact thing the specialist did, just politer. I have been thinking about that all day." "That is the right thing to think about," I said. "Politer is still the same mistake. You just get away with it more often." I put out my hand and he shook it. "You run a good line, Sergeant Trask. I watched it for an hour before anybody knew I was watching. That is the highest compliment I know how to give a cadre. You run a good line when you think nobody important is looking. That is the only time it counts." Captain Reyes caught me on the way to my truck as the sun was going down. He wanted to apologize for the morning, for the way I had been received, and I stopped him. "Do not apologize for your course, sir," I said. "The morning was not a failure. The morning was the most honest in-brief I have ever gotten. I found out how your line behaves when it thinks no one is watching, and I found out your senior instructor will hold attention for a stranger the second he understands he is wrong. And I found out one of your specialists is smart enough to be quiet after being loud. That is a good course. It has some sanding to do. They all do. But it is a good course, and I am glad to have it." Reyes looked at me for a moment in the long light. "They are going to tell this story for 10 years, he said. "Let them tell the right one," I said. "Not the one where the legend put the loud kid in his place. The one where a line found out you cannot tell who a person is by looking. That is the story that is actually worth 10 years. I drove off the installation that night, and I pulled over on the shoulder of a dark road a few miles out, and I called Toby Renner. He answered on the first ring. He always answers on the first ring. I think he has a sense for when it is me. "Elise," he said. It is late. You okay? I am fine, I said. I started the new course today. Yeah? I could hear him moving to another room, away from the sound of a television and a kid's voice, and something in my chest eased at the ordinary domesticity of it, the whole entire point of everything, alive on the other end of a phone line in a town I had driven a long way to visit more than once. How did it go? Some kid at the fence thought I was a lost civilian, I said. Offered to live stream me falling off an obstacle. Renner laughed, delighted, the laugh of a man who knows exactly how that story ends. Oh no, what did you do to him? I taught him about his elbow, I said. There was a pause on the line. Renner has known me for 14 years. He knows what the younger version of me would have done to a boy like that, and he knows why she stopped, and he was there for the reason. Poole would have liked that, he said, quiet. The elbow thing. That is very him. Yeah, I said. I know. That is kind of the point. We talked for a while longer, about his kids and his job at the hardware store and nothing important, which is the best kind of conversation there is, the kind you only get to have because a right man made a wrong trade on a ridge one cold morning. Then I let him go back to his family, and I sat on the shoulder of that dark road for a few minutes with the engine ticking, and then I drove home. The morning had wanted to be about me. I let it be about the line instead. That is the only kind of victory I have any use for anymore. I want to say something to you now, whoever you are, because I think there is a decent chance you have stood at a fence somewhere and had a room, decide who you were before you got to say a single word. It happens to everybody eventually. Somebody looks at you and sees the clothes, or the age, or the way you carry yourself, or the fact that you are a woman standing quietly at the edge of a place that thinks it belongs to someone else, and they file you under nothing, and they do it out loud, and they do it in front of people. It is one of the oldest, cheapest things human beings do to each other. Being underestimated is not rare. It is the water most of us swim in. Here's the only thing I know that helps. Do not spend yourself on the comeback. The comeback feels good for about 4 seconds, and it gives nothing back, and I have the receipts to prove it. When a room has already decided who you are, the loud correction just makes you a louder version of the same argument, and you both walk away exactly who you were. Let the work answer instead. It is so much slower. It does not photograph well. It will not go viral. But the work is the only thing that has ever actually changed a room's mind. And more important than that, it is the only thing that will still be true about you long after the room has forgotten it was ever wrong. Keep your hands still. Let them laugh if they are going to laugh. And then get on the line and do the thing you can do. Cleanly, for the record, not for the audience, and let who you are and what you can do introduce themselves to each other in their own time. You do not owe anyone the announcement. You never did. The people who matter will figure it out. The ones who do not figure it out were never going to, and they are not your work to do. A firing line taught me that, over 24 years. So did a quiet man who is not here to say it himself, which is why I am saying it for him. The line always tells the truth, eventually. So does a life. Stand on yours. The end.